All right, moving on with day 2 of chapter 4 today. Sorry, I messed up my date there. It's 25th. This one just says graph using technology. So, if you graph this in a Desmos, graphing calculator, whatever, you're going to get basically the same thing. And you're going to get a graph here that you're probably not super familiar with. And if you remember, the title of this whole unit, this unit 4, is called rational functions. This is a rational function. We'll talk more about those over the next few days. But if I get this in here and I graph it, it looks like this. And it's a pretty weird type of graph. And so to kind of sketch that out a little better, because even on here it looks a little bit funky. So just so you know exactly what's going on here, you have a curve here that has boundaries of your axes here, meaning it is going to approach, but it's never going to actually touch those. And then we have the same exact thing going on down here in this quadrant as well. So we get a graph that looks like this. And what this means is this graph exists where it keeps getting closer and closer and closer to this x-axis, but it never actually will touch it or cross it. But it doesn't level off either. It's getting infinitely closer every little bit. Like, think of it as like cutting it in half and then in half and then in half, but it never actually ever gets there. It just keeps getting closer and closer and closer. The same thing happens everywhere on this. So these boundaries and these boundaries, it's approaching but not touching. There's a special name for that, which we're going to see a lot of in the rest of this chapter. The name for that is it's called an asymptote, which is a pretty cool word. So an asymptote is a line that a graph approaches but never touches. Okay, so in this case, the x-axis and the y-axis would be considered asymptotes because the graph is approaching but never touching either of those lines. And if you wonder why that happens, it actually makes sense. You're dividing by x. And if x was 0, like pretend you plugged in 0 for x, you'd have 1 divided by 0. You probably learned in, first time you ever learned about division, you learned you can't divide by 0. If you ask your calculator to divide by 0, it says error, divide by 0, because you can't. You can't imagine taking a group of 30 students, trying to divide them into 0 groups. You can't do that. So because this is causes an error, or it's undefined, is another way to put that. That's why this graph doesn't exist at 0. So when x is 0, this graph can't be there. It never reaches when x is 0. And for the same reason, as you put numbers in here, this never gets to 0. No matter how big of a number you put into this. If you put 1 million into this, it's still 1 over 1 million. It's going to get closer. Like imagine going way out here to 1 million. It's going to still be 1 over 1 million, like 0.001. And same thing, you went out to 1 billion. It's still going to be at 0.9 zeros and a 1. So it'll keep approaching but never touch that line. That's the type of graphs, and that's the type of stuff we're going to be seeing this whole unit, is that style and that type of thing going on. So just going to introduce it today, and we're going to build on it going forward.